Morning, guys. Welcome to the first question and answer segment that we were going to be doing. I've had this, it started about a month ago. I had some very good questions start coming in, and obviously I direct those questions on a personal level right back to folks, whether these questions come in on, let's say, YouTube or Facebook or any of our social media. We've even got a TikTok account now, so we're hip. But anything that these drives these questions to the channels, I always respond. You'll see a lot of times I respond to them initially, thanking them for making the question or the comment, and I get comments from great comments to death threats. Don't get me wrong, but we take those questions, and I started seeing a pattern that some folks had some generally very good, solid questions that I have answered, and that I have been able to work through with some folks on their properties, but it's never been anything. It's been kind of on a personal base, on a one-on-one, if you will. So what I'm doing today is I decided that what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring these questions and answers to you guys in kind of segments here. So we're going to do a couple today, and then throughout the weeks, mid weeks, as our other videos are posted, we're going to do some of these question and answer. I think you guys will find these very beneficial because, like I said, what I'm seeing is sometimes it's the first question, and then within a week, whatever that is, Murphy's Law, I guess you call it. I'll have 2 or 3 of these same questions right back to back. And it's kind of a wow factor, because by the end of it, there's even things that I learn by just talking out loud with you guys, because obviously every property is different, and it gets to a point where we start communicating back and forth, and we start hitting on things that I've experienced and that I'd recommend, and things that some of these folks that are asking these questions have seen, and just because of the area, just because of the contour of the land. All this stuff ties into it. So this morning I've got a question that came from a gentleman, Phil from Ohio, asked me this question. I think it's a very, very good question, and I've got some points that we need to kind of talk about here. So the question is, 2 or 4, those of us that are leasing land, how can we have a high success rate while not being able to improve our properties? That was a question. When it asked, it was like very pronounced to me, very loud. And then right after that, I had two or three other questions that pretty much asked the same question. Some of it was not being able to hunt some, or promote some areas on public ground, but kind of the same theory. So this goes for private and public. So the public guys that are watching, public land hunters that are watching, kind of take this private view that I'm going to answer Phil's question here, and I've already spoke to him, but be able to reach out and kind of use that in your area of your public land hunting. So when he asked me that, to those of you guys that are tuning in and following along, and to ask that question of your lease ground, and what can you do? You can't possibly just go in. If you're a landowner, you can go in and get a design. You can implement this stuff. You can have us come in and do it. You guys can implement the stuff yourself, whatever the case is. But on leased ground, unless you have a really strong, it's a family parcel that's been in the family for years, or let's say it's an uncle or an aunt that owns it and they're willing to let you do some work on it, that is a very strong question. So the first thing that came to my mind when answering that was, what I always like to do, it takes me back to the days of guiding, because guiding in the Midwest, like where I was at in Pike County, Illinois, is a perfect example. We lease these properties, and you're not able to do anything. And back then, guys, we weren't able to plant food plots. Food plots weren't a huge deal back then. Obviously, a lot of the bigger names in the industry and stuff like that, and I was in an area down there where felt pretty fortunate. We were right next to Mark Scroggins and the Primos boys had a camp on Pea Ridge there, if you know where the lodge is at, down in Pike County, southern Pike County, northern Calhoun. And Mark and Terry and all the guys hunted down there for years. But it was we leased these properties and we dealt with this. It's you couldn't go in and physically change or improve this habitat. So down there's obviously a different story. It's you're hunting Midwestern unpressured deer, less unpressured deer I should say, and these deer aren't as they're more apt to use these open ag grounds than they are up here in, let's say, mid-Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota. So there's some variances in there. But to answer the first step in answering that question is what I recommend doing to everybody that brings this up. I always ask when they say we can't do this on this private ground because we're leasing it and the landowner won't let us. I always ask, have you asked the landowner? And it's always a pause, and then the answer is, well, no, I guess we haven't asked them. And why should we ask them? What's that going to help us? We don't own the ground. The reason that I say ask the landowners is because if a landowner is in a situation where that ground, unless it's enrolled into a state management program, let's say CRP or whatever that case is, a lot of these landowners know what their program is or their idea for the future. And if their idea for the future is leasing to hunters, they would be it'd be way more favorable to them to be able to hire somebody with yourself being able to hunt it to come in and do habitat improvements and make it a whitetail hunting parcel. Just because a property is a 40 or an 80 in Michigan or Illinois or Indiana, wherever you're at, doesn't mean that it's a whitetail property. So that's the first step that I do. I always ask, reach out to them landowners, because you might find that this hurdle that you've been trying to get over isn't a hurdle at all. And if you're going to have to take a serious approach. I don't recommend just saying, hey, can I go in and create some bedding areas and I'm going to take my chainsaw back there and hinge cut some trees, and the landowner's eyes will get about this big around and they're like, no, that's not going to happen. I would tell you that same thing if you came to me and asked me that. So the approach is take this question and this approach and talk directly to them, and that's where I come in. If you guys have these possibilities of this land that you're leasing, and you would like someone to be in your corner, that's a service that I'm willing to offer free of charge, to speak to landowners that are on the bubble of maybe doing this. And it's a step that I see a lot of folks aren't taking advantage of. It's kind of the same step, guys, as going about asking permission to even hunt the property to begin with. Some parcels out there aren't being hunted at all because nobody asked. Other parcels are not being hunted because people absolutely refuse to let anybody deer hunt it. But how do you know? I wouldn't take the advice from Joe down the road that wasn't able to hunt it, because you don't know the story. You don't know if he did something wrong, if he's known in the area for doing something wrong, if there wasn't the respect level that you could bring to the table. So to me, it's go out and ask these questions. Go out and ask. The worst thing you can be told is no. And when they tell you no, you leave with a handshake and you leave it as a respectful thing. It's not a curse them as you're going out the driveway because they won't let you hunt. If that's the area that you want to be in, then circle the section and find somebody that will. As far as doing habitat improvements on these, if like I said, that service I'm willing to do. So if you guys have somebody out there that's on the fence, you have to be able to discuss these choices with them about how their future would benefit by letting someone lease their property and do habitat improvements. Now, to those of you that are gaining access to these farms without leasing, more power to you, because that's going to become a thing of the past here real shortly. I know there's some guys out there that do it. I've got good friends of mine that hunt properties that they don't pay a dime for, and that's great. And I don't take anything from that. I wish I had some of that capability myself. But what I do is I either wait until I have that amount of money to lease or whatever, because it's a sign of respect towards the landowner. And to me, that kind of locks you in on stuff like this, as far as taking things to the next level and being able to reach out and do some habitat improvements. So what do you do if the landowner says, yeah, I mean, if you go to this is the approach that I would take. I've got somebody that's a professional in this business, that if you are looking to have your property continuously leased in the future, there's ways for you to be able to kind of put a concrete footprint, if you will, towards the future, so your property always continuously gets leased if I'm not here. This is you talking to the landowner. And once you lay that out there for them, you can use me and say, hey, I have a professional that's willing to give you a call and explain that to you about if the gentleman that's trying to lease your property, the thing I would talk to the landowner, I would go down the lines of, hey, you're these folks that are looking to lease your property, we can come in, and of course there's going to be a charge for me to come in and do these services. But whether you guys split that cost or whatever the cost, whatever that is, or it's a design and the gentleman that's hunting it can improve the property over the next 3-year term that he has at least, or whatever the case is, you want to make sure that's done right. You want to make sure that's done in the right area by the right person. But what that's going to do is you make it very feasible that the landowner is able to use your trail cameras, your hunting pictures, and everything if you do not release it, or if you something happens and you're forced off from the property. Hopefully nothing like that happens by a mistake that you've made out of disrespect or anything. But if that happens, it comes to a point where you are not able to do that. Make it very clear that they have access to all on a contract. So if they want it, they can get it. That they can get all your trail camera pictures, and they can get the success that you've had on that piece, and obviously pictures of the improvements that you've done. What they're going to be able to do, they're going to be able to get somebody back in that seat to replace you as a leaseor, a leasee, to make sure that their investment, their return on investment is taken care of. And I think, like I said, I think a lot of that is folks just aren't asking the question. And you can't get to that point, you can't get me involved, or you cannot start doing these if you don't ask. And I think a lot of it is just, it's a simple sign of respect. I'm not just going to try to lease a property and the first thing out of my mouth, hey, can I hinge cut a bunch of your trees? That's not the approach you want to take, and it's a hurdle to get over, just because a lot of you guys are built like I am. You just don't want to burn that bridge, I guess, or try to jump over that hurdle before you're ready to jump, kind of thing. So that's one thing, and that's what I would recommend doing. Now, this tying into the second portion of this is, how do we have a high success rate? If you're able to do some improvements on this property, that's great. Be able to have me come in and do a design and make that property function the way it should. If you're not able to do anything, where does that tie into, or how does that tie into it? So the one thing that you might be asking yourself in regards to the question that Phil had answered or asked me was, if I can't do anything, so I can't do the crop, the leaving the crop that you're speaking of. I can't do this, I can't do that, I can't do anything but just hunt what is there. You have to be able to look at the pressure that is around your area. If guys are knowing that you're hunting, or two, thinking that you're doing habitat improvements, let's take the effect out that you're not able to do any habitat improvements, and they know you're not able to do any habitat improvements. Where does that leave you? And that's kind of what Phil's question is regards here. What do we do? The biggest thing is, guys, to me, is a couple things. You have to use the contour of the land, and if your neighbors know that an area that you have leased is productive, has been productive in the past, something that they weren't able to lease, that they didn't lease, that somebody else had it leased up for years, whatever the issue is, and it's produced good deer in the past, you're going to have a lot of eyeballs. Anybody that knows the area, anybody that knows hunting in general is going to have eyes on you. And what that does to me is that's okay. You have to be willing to let these deer go during, the object is to be okay letting these deer go during the nighttime hours. What I find is everybody wants to keep these deer for a 24-hour period on their farm. They don't want anybody else to see them. They don't want anybody else getting them on trail camera. If these guys on your neighboring properties are getting these deer on trail camera in the dark, that's fine, because unless they violate, they're not going to shoot these deer after hours. So in regards, like I said, to Phil's question, is what do we do? What you have to do is you have to know that these surrounding areas, these other farms, are being hunted incorrectly. And the truth of it is, guys, is and I'm a guy of percentages, but 95% of properties anywhere in the country are being hunted incorrectly. You've got guys that are and there's still this small window of these guys that are trying to do things right, or trying to go the extra mile, or trying to take the right steps to do this. You have this small window. If you've got a guy next to you that is leasing ground that are doing the right things, then you need to step your game up and you need to do the right things as well. But there's a good chance that your neighbors aren't doing the right thing. And like I've said in the past in other videos you guys have probably picked up on, is I can take an aerial around your area. When we start working on a parcel together, first thing I'm going to do is pull an aerial. I'm going to look, and I'm going to be able to, it's about this quick, and I've said this in other videos, but it's about this quick. You take an aerial, this is your 80, let's say, and all these lands surround it, and it's about this quick. I go around, circle this blind, that blind, this road, that blind, this blind. That's how fast it is going around the area, finding guys that are hunting your neighboring properties wrong. And like I said, I catch a lot of slack on that. It's a huge deal. Everybody wants to sit in a rifle blind out in the middle of a field. That's a huge X to me. If they want to do that, just keep that in mind, that those deer, they might get lucky. They might harvest a deer here or there. Probably going to be an immature deer, and they might get lucky and a doe gets bumped out of somewhere on another neighboring property, hopefully not your property, gets busted out of somewhere, goes running across an ag field, and has a mature buck in tow, and gets shot on a dead run across the field. It's going to happen. The problem is it's not the majority. You need to be the property that's the majority. So if these properties are doing this around your 40, around your 80, these properties are doing this, these guys are hunting these areas incorrectly, it does nothing but helps your property. You just have to be the property that's not aiding or adding to the pressure. So what this does, guys, is the easiest way to explain it is this. It makes your property a staging area. It makes your areas where if your neighbors do have crop ground, or your neighbors are doing food plots, or they especially the food plots right now, because it's such a big push, and let's keep it at food plots because it's a habitat improvement. It's not an ag setting, it's a habitat improvement. Your neighbors are putting these food plots in. There's a really good chance that your neighbors are putting these food plots in an opening, and just because the good Lord made this opening and they're planting these fields there, and they're hunting them wrong. They're hanging tree stands on them, they're getting busted, they're hunting them wrong. And that's a direct attack towards some people, and a lot of people don't like that, but it's a learning curve, and that's why I'm here to help make that understandable, that this is happening. And because it's a known fact, it's happening all over the country, and it happens every day during the hunting season. What that does is to answer, like Phil, the question there, what that does, Phil, is that's going to make your property a staging area, because these deer, if you know that these bedding areas are on your farm and your property is a bypass farm, that's fine, because these deer are going to get in a rhythm where, as long as you're not cutting lines of travel and you're hunting it correctly, they are going to move towards those grounds, towards those food plots on neighbors, towards the ag grounds in the daylight hours. And they're going to stage up 100, 200 yards into your property, and they're going to wait till the neighbor gets out of the stand, and they're going to wait till them does all blow off that that property and that mature buck waits till everything's cleared out. Then he's going to follow the does that are bumped off there, and he's going to go, and they're going to go to the other neighboring property. The moral of the story is he's going to start at your location. And it doesn't take a lot of, when a deer is pressured, it doesn't take a lot of habitat to keep that deer in a beddable area, high pressure deer. And that goes against you know, a lot of things that that we try to create for deer that they need to use: hinge cutting areas, high percentage bedding areas, high stem count, stuff like that. But when a deer doesn't have a lot of options left, he can't bed on the neighboring property because he's been bumped off there 4 times in his bedding areas. Let's say the first week of November or October, he's been bumped twice. He goes to go out to their food plots with the does. He gets bumped. The does get bumped. He will bed in an area where, just like I don't know if you watched the video that I posted the other day, but these deer are bedding in wide open pine trees with a clump that is probably 20 yards a circle of oak brush. That was a little spot of daylight coming through, and they're bedding there. One bed within 10 acres, and I know it was a buck bed because of the track that was coming into it and leaving it. And the reason he's there is because he can see. He takes the comfort out of it. He takes the comfort of having the perfect bedding area, and he places himself in somewhere where he knows he's in the driver's seat, and no one's going to get to him, including predators. So that's the goal. You have to be these properties. That's the things that you have to tie into if you're not able to enhance these bedding areas, and you're not able to do any habitat improvements at all. To me, the biggest mistake that I see folks that lease private ground, or folks that hunt out on public ground, is you do not bank on your ag or your mass harvest, your mass production changing. In other words, we'll start with the public ground. The public ground, as far as your acorn ridges, your unpressured areas, your sanctuaries for these deer that don't get pressured, where they're eating, the high stem counts, browse, all of this has to be noted that that's not going to change. Acorns, white acorns, for example, guys, what I find in the majority, I don't know a percentage, but a majority of the properties around the country is white acorns are great, but white acorns are not, they add into the browse count, if you will, the roughage count, but they are not forever feed. In other words, what's there today is not going to be there. During, towards the end of the rut. Let's say towards the end of the late bow season, you're going to run out of food, and when that happens, your travel completely changes. And the reason that is a lot of these oaks aren't open to the sunlight. They're not producing the way they should. And if you, it looks like a lot when you come across an oak tree that's dropping a lot of acorns. It looks wonderful. Looks like there's a lot of food there. It looks like there's a lot of tonnage. But 2 or 3 deer in a couple of evenings can destroy that. And once it's not a reproducing tree, it doesn't continue to drop these acorns. If they drop once, the deer and the squirrels attack them. All the wildlife attacks them, and they're gone. And your patterns now change to the next producing acorn, or the white oak that was producing, or some areas, the red oaks and stuff. So that happens on private ground as well. And how does that tie into it? The agricultural side of this is huge, is a huge misstep. The ag on this land this leased land sometimes is like ag on privately owned pieces, where guys feel that by having the neighbor, we've got a family farm that my great uncle runs down the road here, and we've got a gentleman, good friend of mine, just around the corner, and they've got a lot of cash crop. The problem is that's cash crop. When it's planted, it's going to be taken, and when it's taken away, the days of picking corn and a lot of tonnage being left on the ground is gone. These combines do not leave anything behind. They do in a lot of areas. Not only do they not leave anything behind on the ground, they turn the fields over because of production reasons and fertilization reasons. fertile reasons, they turn it over right after they do it, right after they harvest the corn. And what that does is that totally shuts down a high producing, that cornfield that was, that was high producing in September and October. Things change, and they change real fast. So don't bank on ag. That's my tip on this topic. Is you go in and you see all this, lease this property, whether it's midsummer where you first get a property, and you're off and running, and you walk into these properties and there's trails everywhere, and this place is just blown up, and you start hanging stands, accessing, these transition areas and these corridors that are going out into, that you feel maybe it's even a staging area that are going out into your neighbor's ag fields, or your ag that's on the property that you're leasing. And all of a sudden the corn gets cut in October and your farm shuts down. A lot of people, what ends up happening is folks don't release the property because there's nothing to hunt over. So to me, that's where a huge misstep is taken into consideration. Here in this area, as everybody knows, like we had, I've always told you guys, 80% of the properties that I manage, or I do work on, not manage, but help, create habitat improvements on, these properties are 80 acres and less, especially here in the Michigan area. And when that happens, when there's ag on these farms and there's ag on your neighbors, what happens is your farm, especially if it's a 20 or a 40, let's say, these farms become bypass farms. And that, to a lot of people, the corn gets cut. Well, we don't have anything to hunt over anymore, and there's no point in leasing this, and away they go. I have worked on parcels that people have bought after that folks have sold because they couldn't keep people there leasing it, and there was folks that were being disrespectful that had leased a piece of property, and there's no deer on there at the end of the season. The reason that is, guys, is because they follow food. So if you have a 20 or a 40 and you got 10 acres, let's say, planted to corn, or it's alfalfa or something like that, or beans even, and when the harvest comes, or the later in the season comes along, and these fields are first of all destroyed, or they are by the deer intake, or the farmer has harvested that crop, what happens is the deer movements obviously are going to change. It's no different than us as humans, going to your local grocery store every Friday after you get your paycheck, and one day you go to get your groceries and it's shut down. It's either went bankrupt, or they shut the doors, locked the doors, and away they went. What's it force you to do? It forces you to go grocery shop 20 more miles down the road at the big box store. Totally changes your day-to-day patterns, totally changes everything. And that's exactly what happens with a whitetail property. So being able to adjust to that is huge. So what I recommend doing is, when you're leasing these properties, not only design and hang these tree stands on. If you aren't able to do any improvements at all, you have to hunt what's there, and they absolutely refuse to let you do any habitat improvements. You have to have a vision of knowing what's going to happen when your crop and your mass producing acorns and stuff like that happens. Your oaks, shut down or get cleaned up. What happens? Where do these deer go? That's why post-season scouting. We just did a video on that last week out on the public ground there, but that's why post-season scouting is so strong, is because that ties into the stuff that you're finding in post-season, whether it's 5 days after the season, where you feel more comfortable that now that if you bump a deer off, then he's got all year to recover. Post-season scouting tells you what happened in the fall during the hunting season, where these deer were, what they were doing, where they were going to feed, if you're not supplementing feed, or you're not baiting or something like that on these farms. That's why post-season scouting is huge. So instead of leasing these farms from starting in July, August, September, where you're going to go in and you're going to hang these tree stands on summer deer movement, you need to lease these farms from January 1 to January 1. And what that's going to do is, not only are you going to be able to scout postseason deer activity after the deer season, whether it's the first year going in on January 1st after the season ends in December. And you're going to be able to put your boots on the ground and find out where these deer are, so you're going to have that step into the next season. And another thing that opens up is that gives you time enough to react and hang these tree stands and be successful on the upcoming season for knowing that these fall patterns. So both of them kind of tie together. So that's my outlook on these places that you cannot habitat. You can't do habitat improvement because of one of the landowner, and we'll do other videos on the public side of it. But this, touching on the public hunting side of it, these are the strategies that come into play when you cannot reach out and you cannot do anything as far as habitat improvements. You have to be able to hunt what's there, what the state has done, what the state's planted. These food plots that you see, the NWTF and the DNR, coming together. We used to plant them for the DNR, and there's like in our area, I think there's like 80 acres or something now that they're doing, and it's a huge deal. Do they get overhunted? Yep, they do. But what happens is a lot of guys don't understand is they're wanting to hunt those areas like a food plot. They go in there, oh, there's a guy hanging on the tree stand that's getting overhunted, and they leave and go to the next one. But what you forgot is that section is 320 acres, let's say 400 acres of forest or government property or public ground, and you've just taken the best bedding area in the county. Could have been the best bedding area in the county that you're surrounded by, and you walked away from it because there's guys hunting the food plots or these easy accessed areas. To me, that's exactly what you're looking for on public ground. I want to go where them guys aren't going, and where those deer are making their way to those locations. That's where you need to be, and it's a great way, especially postseason, where you can go in and see where these deer moved around people. It'll all make sense. So the last thing that ties into this is on a parcel, private parcel, let's say, that you aren't able to do these habitat improvements. What that does, guys, I think there's a huge focus right now. Obviously, everybody's in the food plot planning, especially here, like in Michigan, where baiting is illegal. A lot of people still doing it? Yes, they are, and that's a different topic. But sometimes what happens is, especially on a small parcel, in an area that there's a lot of small parcels, what's happening is the old saying everybody jokes about, you can't do anything on your property. You can't, go out and mow the yard. You can't drink a beer without anybody across the road knowing what you're doing. That plays into the deer hunting mentality. So where this is going is where I'm going with this is, if you go into your property on a 20 or a 40, even an 80, your neighbor is probably going to know what you're doing. At some point in time, your neighbor's going to either walk across the fence when you're doing the improvements. Every property that I've ever done, I've been greeted by the neighbors wanting to know what's going on. I've been not at my properties, properties that I'm putting together for folks, whether I'm just there designing it or whether we're out there doing work with a chainsaw or a piece of equipment. I've always confronted, like, hey, what are you guys doing? It's a reaction that a lot of folks want to know what's going on. If they're deer hunters, what that's going to cause is it's going to cause a focus on your property. So what happens? Sadly, what happens is the guy that is asking questions, your neighbor that's asking questions about what you're doing, doesn't want to invest money into his farm, and he's in the back of his mind, he's going to hunt your habitat improvements. So this is what happens. You start seeing these. If you didn't have it before, if you dump $5,000 or $10,000 into your habitat improvements on your 20 or 40 or an 80, the first thing that's going to happen is you're going to see tree stands on your property lines, and it at times causes a huge ruckus. What I always recommend to my clients is stop and think about the benefits of doing that. One thing, it's not if you make a stink in the area, and if you make it known that you're doing these habitat improvements, the best thing that could happen is, their neighbors see that other people are doing it, so they start doing habitat improvements, and what that does is it moves deer, and then you just have to stay. You have to do what's right, your movement right, to not blow your farm out to aid their farm. But when this neighbor's doing improvements, that neighbor's doing improvements, and you create a chain effect, it creates moving deer. Moving deer are huntable deer. Stagnant deer are hard to hunt. Stagnant deer are what happens when deer are overpressured. They hang up in areas, they start skipping feedings, and that's when your season becomes very, very hard to hunt or be successful. So what happens when these landowners, your neighbors, start hanging tree stands on your fence lines? The best way to handle it is to design your property so when that happens, they are hurting themselves and they're benefiting you. So in other words, if you have a property that runs, you have a road to the south, and you have, I need to probably get a drawing board to help this vision out, but if you have a road to the south and your property, your access is to the south, and you have a 40, let's say, or a 20 or an 80 that runs lengthways longer than it is wide, north and south, and your access is from the south, and you've created this side access so you can access your movements, and one of your bedding areas is not too far from your, you get a lot of pressure from your western neighbor, let's say. The guy on the western property is the one that walked across the fence line when you're doing these habitat improvements, and he knows what's going on. Chances are, whether that's a food plot or a bedding area or whatever he knows that you're creating, he's going to be trying to hunt that movement. Now, the only way that he can hunt that movement if he has something that you don't. And 95% of the time is what they have that you don't on these parcels. After you take my recommendations and you put these properties together as they should be, what they have that you don't is they have improper pressure and improper ways of hunting their property, and it does nothing but benefit yours. And I don't care if it's a 10 or a 20 or a 40, an 80, a 120, it all can play into your favor. A guy from the west comes over, looks at your property, and wants to know what you're doing. Next thing you know, gets into the season, you got some west winds, and that guy tries to access in on your fence line, or he tries to hunt, the deer, get as close as he can. He knows that you enhanced an area for bedding, let's say, and he wants to get as close to it as he can. He comes in there, it's on a northwest wind, let's say, or a straight west wind. He comes in and hunts the east side of his property. The wind blows from his property into yours, and those deer are not going to go to the west. If they go to the west, it's going to be after dark. So what they've done is they've created nocturnal deer movement on their property, and they've done nothing but create more movement internal of your farm. That's the reason that you want to make sure that these properties are designed correctly, because if that happens and it's not designed correctly and those deer get up and get bumped off your fence lines, and these guys are hunting your fence lines, and they get bumped off your property, and they run through your property because there's nothing there to hold them, and they're on to the next guy, or they run out into the fields during rifle season, they continue on and they start moving. That's when the deer start getting harvested that you've been working on, trying to harvest on your own. So you can see how this all ties together. So to answer the question for Phil there in a long-winded way there, a lot of things that you can do to do that. But start first of all, and a recap here. Start by going down that road of asking. Ask if you can. Get me involved so I can present it to your landowner as this is something that will help your property be released or gain marketability for if you ever wanted to sell it. If you and that's the hurdle, guys. That's the sad part of leasing property, because the more that you put into it, it can all be taken away in just a blink of an eye. If you have a 3-year contract you can't stop your landowners from selling the property. You just know this going into it, that they might sell it and you might be out. You go on to the next one. There's nothing you can do about it. There's no time to waste getting into an argument with them, because what's going to happen is they're going to go to the next landowner. The next landowner is going to call when you go try to lease something, and it's a spiral effect that you don't want to be involved in. So treat that with the utmost respect of these landowners. You don't own the land, they do, and try to give them the most respect possible. That's why you want to get them involved, so it shows them that you're trying to help their property, not just help yourself. Big thing. And the next thing, if you can't possibly do it like we've talked, set these properties up so your neighbors' movements and your neighbors' encroachments help your property. And you have to know where this food is. Do not get caught into this, and I always say this, don't get caught in these traps, but don't get caught in this trap of hanging these tree stands, leasing a property in July, August, September, and going in there and hanging these tree stands on summer movement. Because when the fall of the year comes, your October, November, December time period, your 3 months out of the year that you've paid to lease these properties come, and that ag leaves, you're going to be disappointed. So make sure postseason scouting is done, and these areas are known. And it might be areas to end the topic here. What I recommend is another huge tool that can be done, and it's more, maybe you can wrap it up into your lease money. Maybe at the end of the year, depending on what he's got planted, you're going to have to go and sit down with them and go over the possibilities of leaving some corn, let's say, standing. But make sure whatever section of corn, like these inside corners, guys, get destroyed. They're an inside corner, like a southeast inside corner on a field. If you're lucky enough to have a southeast inside corner on something that you're leasing, usually if the deer numbers are like they are across the country in a lot of parcels that I set foot on, what you're going to find is these areas are destroyed. Inside of these southeast corners are wiped out. It's a way that these deer feel comfortable, depending, of course, what's internal of a wood lot that they're bedding or using as cover. But these inside corner of these fields, to make a long story short, these inside corner of these fields get destroyed. That's a perfect area to buy that corner of crops from the gentleman, the farmer, to leave standing, and to know that that's just that much more food. And so what happens is, if you know that this crop is going to leave in, if you know this crop is all going to get cut, let's say corn is all going to get cut in October, November, that's the time to be able to know ahead that you're going to buy this section, this inside corner of the crop ground, your corn, and that's when it comes in, and you go in August, and after the crop is showing a sign of already being destroyed. A lot of these farmers, believe it or not, a lot of people don't think this happens, but a lot of farmers will let you go in August, and that's when you want to go in and you want to take your plot masters in and your buggies or your tractors, and you want to till those inside corners up and plant your brassicas, and use the whatever corn is left standing as a screen, not a screen for you to walk through, but a screen making that inside corner of that field feel comfortable. That's something where they'll feel. Now, if it's all the corn's gone and they walk out into an 80-acre cornfield, chances are, especially here in a high pressured area, Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, they're not going to walk out into these fields without feeling. They're not going to walk out into them, period, with high pressure. So you can see how that, by going the extra mile, it's going to, like I said, it's going to cost you a little extra money. These farmers make their money on this crop ground, obviously by harvesting it, but they're not going to just give it to you. If they do, that's great, but chances are they're not. So we'll go into these inside corners, or whatever that case is, lay this, have this idea designed. That's where you're going to leave standing, and you're going to benefit by putting some, tying some, sewing some brassicas into those areas. Now, if it's in a state enrolled program where you can't do these, it's not crop ground, it's CRP, let's say, or they planted it into native grass. That's ties into the next question and answer here that I'll leave for the next one. But what do you do if it's all CRP and there's no food value, and then what do you do? So that's coming down the road here on another video. So I hope this was informational. Take these steps, go the extra mile, and I know this is a lengthy video, and that's what they're meant to do. They're going to be a little bit longer, and I hope I didn't lose a lot of people there. But it's questions like this that, like I said, that get asked time and time again, that I know that you guys are wanting answers to. And like Phil here from Ohio, he was actually a gentleman that reached out to me had seen the stuff on YouTube and actually reached out. He's in I've drove truck through there for years, and he's in a slammer area of Ohio. But so yeah, that's them are great questions. I appreciate that, guys, and keep these questions coming. The next one that we're gonna do, I'll try to lead into these in these videos, but the next one that we're gonna do is touching on that. What do I do if these farms have been enrolled into CRP for some income from the landowners, and there's just no value as far as food? What do I do? Where do I go? So thanks, guys. Have a good week. Appreciate it.